brainstem, you have to make a transverse section or horizontal section at each level of the brainstem. At the level of the midbrain, actually, if you want to see the differences at each level, you have to make two sections. One at the level of the superior colliculi, and the other one at the level of the inferior colliculi. If you can remember, I made a mention that at the back of the midbrain, there are two pairs of swellings, one pair above and one pair below. These are four bodies, and they are known as corpora quadrigemina because they are four. So they are called corpora what? Corpora quadrigemina. Corpora quadrigemina. That means four bodies. Corpora means body, like from corpus. So corpus means body. Quadrigemina means four. Are you clear? So you have four bodies, and then the two above, the two below. So if you make a cross section of the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculi, you are going to see two large nuclei, one on either side, making this superior colliculi. Each of the superior colliculus contains this superior nucleus. Are you clear? And this superior colliculi nuclei are responsible for visual reflexes, which we have discussed before. So, just anterior to the two superior colliculi nuclei, you have a small opening known as aqueduct of Sylvius or cerebral aqueduct. We call it cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius. Aqueduct of Sylvius. So this opening, known as cerebral aqueduct or aqueduct of Sylvius, lies in the midline in between the two superior colliculi nuclei and anterior to the two nuclei. So this aqueduct joins the third ventricle, that is like the space lying between the two thalami that we discussed before, and the fourth ventricle that is lying behind the pons and the medulla oblongata. So this duct serves as a connection between the two ventricles, the third and the fourth ventricles. So it connects these two ventricles together. The aqueduct is surrounded completely by a sheet of gray matter, what you call periductal, gray matter. Periaqueductal gray matter. This periaqueductal gray matter, which is this one, periaqueductal gray matter, I said it surrounds the aqueduct of Sylvius or cerebral aqueduct. So, anterior to this periaqueductal gray matter, you have two nuclei. This nuclei, one on either side, is the motor nucleus of the oculomotor nerve. If you can remember, I made mention while doing the introduction to the brainstem, the oculomotor nerve exits from the midbrain. And so it is one nuclei. It is at the level of the superior colliculi. So the nuclei of the oculomotor nerve lie at the level of the superior colliculi, just anterior to the periaqueductal gray matter. And so it is on axons. The axons of this motor nucleus of the oculomotor nerve, they pass forward, you understand, until they come out of the interpeduncular fossa. Are you clear? So by so doing, when these axons of the oculomotor nerve come from its corresponding nucleus on either side, they have to pass through nuclei, one on either side. So that nucleus on either side is what we call red nucleus, which we'll discuss later on. So it passes these axons of this oculomotor nerve as they come. That nerve passes through this red nucleus that is lying just posterior to the medial half of this substantia nigra that I'm going to discuss later on. Similarly, posterior and lateral to the oculomotor nucleus, we have what we call the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus. This Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, if you can remember, I made mention about it, that is a nucleus responsible for the pupillary light reflex that we discussed before. So this Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, you know, its own fibers also connects or joins with the fibers of the oculomotor nerve. So the fibers of Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, it joins the fibers of the oculomotor nerve so that it blends with the fibers of the oculomotor nerve, and the whole, you know, bundles of axons forming the oculomotor nerve, they all come out of the interpeduncular fossa. So now we've seen that the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus is lying posterior and lateral to the nucleus of the oculomotor nerve on either side, and its major function is to do with this pupillary light reflex, and also its major function also is parasympathetic functions, which we'll see later on again. So again, just behind this Edinger-Westerpal nucleus again, on this relationship with this periaqueductal gray matter, posterior to the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, you have another, you know, nucleus, what we call this encephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. If you can remember, while I was discussing, you know, part of the informations or sensation, you know, carrying pain, temperature, you know, crude touch, you know, and pressure, you know, from the lower limb, the upper limb, and the trunk, as they ascend up, they pass through, you know, they pass through the, you know, spinothalamic, sorry, through the, what you call medial lemniscus. We have discussed that before. And sorry, through the spinothalamic tract, we have discussed that. So, but for the head and the neck, we said that information of this pain, temperature, you know, crude touch and pressure, you know, they pass through, you know, the trigeminal nerve. So through that trigeminal nerve, you know, I was discussing the three nuclei that I was, you know, telling you. We have the mesencephalic nucleus, we have the pontine nucleus, then we have the spinal nucleus. So the mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve is this one here. So it is lying in relation to the posterior aspect of the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus and the lateral side of the periaqueductal gray matter around the aqueduct of the cerebellum. Are you clear? So definitely, this nucleus contains those information for sensation of the pain, temperature, crude touch, and pressure, you know, and, you know, from the head and neck. And so, you know, it passes, you know, to the thalamus, and you know where they end in the thalamus. So apart from that, when you now go anterior lateral to each of the superior colliculus, this is probably, we say this is the right side, this is the right, for example, and this is the left. So anterior lateral to each of the superior colliculus, there is also another, you know, nucleus, what we call a pretectal nucleus. This pretectal nucleus is also part of the, you know, pupillary light reflex that I discussed before. And so this nucleus also has connections with the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus again. And it also, you know, from the same side, it also goes behind, you know, comes, you know, to attach to also, you know, join with another Edinger-Westerpal nucleus of the opposite side. Are you clear? So much so that another, this one also from this side, as it connects with this, it comes to this, and then it goes to this side and comes to this side again. So this disposition that I have just put here, I think is just a little bit of mistake, so I'm just trying to correct this. So we have this deposition known as posterior commissure here. So the deposition of this, you know, is like you have the position of this, and then you have the position of another nerve which we'll discuss later on. So we have this, you know, the position of these fibers coming from the pretectal nucleus of one side, going to the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus of the opposite side. Similarly, from the pretectal nucleus of one side, it goes to the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus of the other side. Are you clear? So that you have the position of this pretectal nucleus of either side, so much so that if you now want to elicit what we call the pupillary light reflex, if you shine light on one pupil, you ask your subject, either your friend or any other person, you use a torch light, you shine the light on the face of, or on the eye, one eye of that person. The pupil of that side will constrict, and the other one will also constrict at the same time. The reason because of this, crisscrossing. Are you clear? Because of this crossing, this one comes to the opposite, the other one goes to the opposite side, and that is why you have when you shine one eye, this one contracts, and the other one also contracts because of this communication or the acquisition of these fibers from the pretectal nucleus. Are you clear? So now we've seen how this connection between the pretectal nucleus with the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus of one side and the connection of one pretectal nucleus of one side with the opposite side. And so you have this pupillary light reflex. Similarly, with regard to this Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, with regard to this Edinger-Westerpal nucleus, there is also connection from the frontal part of the brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex. You can remember that. We said that the frontal cortex is responsible for judgment, decision making, reasoning, and so on and so forth. So fibers from there also come, from that side to link with the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus. And the connection with that, if you can remember, in the frontal lobe there, we have what we call frontal eye field area. You get my point? So from there now, the connection of that area from the prefrontal cortex and the prefrontal eye field area, connection with this Edinger-Westerpal nucleus is responsible for what we call accommodation reflex. Are you clear? Accommodation reflex, if you are reading, you have to look at your book. You have to focus at exactly where you want to read. That is what we call accommodation. Are you clear? And this accommodation is as a result of this connection of that, prefrontal cortex with the Edinger-Westerpal nucleus. Are you clear? So now, just in between the two oculomotor nerves on either side, just anterior to the oculomotor nuclei, oculomotor nucleus here on either side, anterior to each of these, you have, what we call medial longitudinal fasciculus. This medial longitudinal fasciculus is connecting all the cranial nerves responsible for the movement of the eye. So we have all these three nerves that I mentioned before while doing the introduction, like the oculomotor nerve, the trochlear nerve that I will discuss later on, as well as the abducens nerve. All these, cranial nerves responsible for the movement of the eye, they also, join or connects with this medial longitudinal fasciculus just to allow for the movements of the eye. You get it? And so that is the essence of this medial longitudinal fasciculus and other things like that. So now, if you come to the divisions of the midbrain itself, if you draw an imaginary line just immediately behind the cerebral aqueduct, you imagine a line passing behind the cerebral aqueduct. You draw a transverse line like this, imaginary line like this. Anything behind it is what we call the tactum of the midbrain. That means this tactile area of the midbrain is, containing this superior colliculi there. And this one is the same thing as the same section that if you do it at the level of the inferior colliculi, that is also going to have the same tactum like this one. The only difference is that at the level of the inferior colliculi, you have the inferior colliculi nuclei. Are you clear? So section of the midbrain at either level contains this tactum. You get my point? The only difference is that at the superior colliculi, you have the superior colliculi nuclei. At the level of the inferior section, you have the inferior colliculi nuclei. Are you clear? Good. So anything anterior to this tactum is what you call cerebral pedunculus. Are you clear? So anything anterior, because this is a posterior aspect and this is the anterior aspect of the brainstem. You get it? So this is the anterior aspect of the midbrain, this is the posterior aspect of the midbrain. So anything anterior to this imaginary line dividing the tactum of the cerebral peduncle, so anything anterior to it is the cerebral peduncle, and the cerebral peduncle is also further subdivided into two parts by this substantia nigra that we discussed before, which I will also discuss now again. So this substantia nigra demarcates one anterior part and another posterior part. So the cerebral peduncles They lie anterior to the tectum, and they are further subdivided into two parts by substantia nigra. So anterior to the substantia nigra is what we call crus cerebri. So this anterior aspect here is what we call crus cerebri. Are you clear? While the remaining aspect of the cerebral peduncle is what we call the tegmentum. We call it what? Tegmentum. So anything behind the substantia nigra and anterior to this imaginary line passing behind the cerebral aqueduct is what we call the tegmentum, or tegmental part of the midbrain. While anterior to the tegmentum is what we call the crus cerebri. Are you clear? Yeah. So this substantia nigra, if you can remember, while I was discussing the direct and indirect pathway of the basal nuclei, I discussed about the different parts of the substantia nigra. We said that this substantia nigra actually it is a kind of pigmented kind of structure that is lying across the whole length of the midbrain. So it can be found both in the superior section and at the same time found in the inferior section of the midbrain. So posterior half of this substantia nigra is pigmented. The reason is because it contains a lot of granules containing melanin, and that is why it is dark in complexion. So the posterior half of, because this is the anterior aspect, the posterior half of the substantia nigra contains this dark portion, what is called pars compacta. Are you clear? The reason for it being dark is because it contains melanin, and what it secretes, if you can remember, we said that area secretes dopamine. So the axons of these neurons present in the pars compacta, they secrete the dopamine, so the fibers are dopaminergic. The anterior half of this substantia nigra is a little bit, lighter as compared to the pars compacta, and that is why it is called pars reticulata. So you have pars compacta, you have pars reticulata, which is less darker when you compare it with the posterior half. Reason because it contains less melanin as compared to the pars compacta. Are you clear? And so the kind of neurotransmitter that is being released at the substantia nigra at the level of the pars reticulata is GABA. So that means substantia nigra releases both GABA and dopamine. Are you clear? So we have seen that, and we have already known the function of this substantia nigra in the direct and indirect pathway of what we discussed with regard to the motor movement, information coming from the cerebral cortex down to the basal nuclei, and then finally to the thalamus, and then before it finally goes back into the motor cortex of the cerebral hemisphere. So now we have seen this, and so if you now look at area behind the substantia nigra, if you divide the substantia nigra into two, lateral half and medial half. In the posterior medial half of each of the substantia nigra, you have these bodies, what we call red nucleus on either side. So we have a pair of red nuclei. They are red in the sense that when you now make a staining at the level of that superior colliculi, you are going to see these two nuclei there. At the posterior medial aspect of each of the substantia nigra, they are red because they contain a lot of vessels. So they are highly vascularized. And blood contains, hemoglobin. And hemoglobin, is red, and it contains iron. You get it? So iron is also brownish, reddish in color like that. That is why when you stain it, it appears red because of high vascularity and the amount of hemoglobin or iron present in the nuclei. Are you clear? So that is why they look reddish when you now make a cross-section of that. As I told you before, these oculomotor nerves, they all pass through each of these red nucleus. And fibers from the red nucleus, they descend down into the spinal cord as what we call cerebrospinal tract. And when we make a cross-section of the spinal cord, we will see where this cerebrospinal tract terminates and their own function. Similarly, these fibers, axons of fibers of these neurons from either side, they also crisscross, close to the posterior aspect of the interpeduncular fossa. So that fibers of axons from this side, they cross to the opposite side, just like the position of the pyramids at the lower level of the medulla oblongata that I said when I was describing the introduction. Are you clear? Good. So areas of interest with regard to the tegmentum of the midbrain is like you are going to see the lemnisci. We have discussed various lemnisci while discussing in the previous lectures. I think I have discussed the medial lemniscus, where I discussed about information with regard to the fine touch, vibration sense, and proprioception sense. You understand that they pass, from the limbs, lower limbs, trunk, upper limbs, and what have you, and then they ascend through the gracile fasciculus, cineatus fasciculus, and then they ascend up. They now crisscross to the opposite side as medial lemniscus, right? So the medial lemniscus ascends up before it finally goes into the thalamus. And so you are going to see this medial lemniscus across all the part of the brain stem. So you can see medial lemniscus in the medulla oblongata, in the pons, and in the midbrain at any section. Are you clear? So apart from this medial lemniscus carrying this fine touch, vibration sense, proprioceptive sense, and what have you, we also spoke about the spinal lemniscus. Spinal lemniscus, if you can remember, we talked about the pain, temperature sensation, fluid touch, and pressure from the lower limbs. Are you clear? And from the upper limbs, trunks, and what have you, they ascend up, and then they finally ascend up. The two, we have anterior and lateral spinothalamic tract before they ascend up to form what we call spinothalamic tract, and that is the spinal lemniscus. As it ascends, it passes across all the three parts of the brainstem. That means we can see spinal lemniscus at the level of medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain. Are you clear? Yes. Fine. So the spinal lemniscus lies posterolateral to the medial lemniscus. The medial lemniscus is lying directly behind, the middle of the substantia nigra. And so just posterolateral to medial lemniscus, you have the spinal lemniscus carrying such information. The other one is what we call the trigeminal lemniscus. You can remember that we said that the trigeminal lemniscus carries sensation for all this pain, temperature, crude touch, and pressure, fine touch, vibration sense, and proprioception from the head and neck. This information from the trigeminal nerve carrying this, they enter into the three nuclei of the trigeminal nerve, which we said is encephalic, pons, and spinal, and then it ascends up until it reaches, the brainstem. So here in the upper part of the midbrain, you have this trigeminal lemniscus lying behind and a little bit medial to the spinal lemniscus. So you will see this arrangement of three lemnisci here, arranged at that order in form of comma shape. When you now make a cross section, just like a comma like that, on either side. And so they now carry this information to the thalamus. So actually, that is, the description of the tegmental or intrategmental, group of nuclei and tracts, And so when you now come to the crus cerebri of either side, the crus cerebri is divided into three parts. We have the lateral part, we have the middle part, and then we have the medial part. Each of these parts of the crus cerebri contains fibers coming from the cerebral cortex. These fibers are bundled together to go into either of this part of the crus cerebri. So fibers coming from the parietal part of the cerebral cortex and the temporal part of the cerebral cortex, they bundle it together and get, bundled in the lateral part of the crus cerebri. So here we have what we call parieto temporopontine fibers. We have what? Parieto temporopontine fibers. Are you clear? So here in the midline here, we have the corticospinal tract and the corticobulbar tract, or corticospinal fibers and corticobulbar fibers. That means those fibers coming from the motor and premotor areas. Are you clear? Responsible for our voluntary motor movements. They descend down, as we said, they come into the brainstem, they pass through this middle portion. And among these fibers now, since from that motor from the motor cortex, you have area where the face is. I know that movement of the muscle of the face is by the cranial nerves. So those fibers coming from the area of the face in the motor area of the cerebral cortex, they descend down as what we call corticobulbar fibers, so that to go into the nuclei of the cranial nerves responsible for the supply of muscles responsible for the motor movements of our face. Are you clear? So those fibers are called corticobulbar fibers. Those are responsible for the movement of our muscles with regard to the limbs and other part of the trunk. They are what we call corticospinal fibers or tracts. So here you have a bundle of both corticospinal and corticobulbar. Those ones on the medial side, they are fibers coming from the frontal lobe of the cerebral, the frontal part of the cerebral cortex. So those fibers, they descend down and then they bundle together at the medial side of the crus cerebri, and then before they finally go into the pons, and then they finally enter into the cerebellar peduncle, which we'll discuss later on. So if you are asked in the exam to make a well-leveled diagram, describe the anatomy of the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculus, that is how we are going to discuss it. Are you clear? Yes.